has arisen because of a great opportunity presented by the visit to the Melbourne Law School of two distinguished Chinese academics who work on charity law in the Chinese setting. One is Professor Liu Xin, who is a professor at the Zhejiang University of Technology. He's also the director of the Centre for Charity Law at that institution. And he has had a long and distinguished career working, researching in charities, and also playing his role in the work that led to the enactment of the charity law in China a few years ago. Professor Li Dejian, sitting next to him, is also an academic at Zhejiang University of Technology, and he is the Vice Director of the Centre for Charity Law. He has been published widely on charities, and he's also well known to academics in the UK because he was a graduate of the University of Liverpool, where he did his PhD under the supervision of Deborah Morris, who's well known to many people here. The third panellist is one of our own at Melbourne Law School, Hui Jing. Jing is a PhD student here at the Melbourne Law School. He works under the supervision of Professor Sarah Biddulph, who's an expert on Chinese law, and me. And Jing's PhD studies look at the governance of charitable trusts in China in the new legal landscape. And prior to coming here, he was working in trustee company, advising trustee companies and working in the legal sector in China. So a distinguished panel, and we're going to hear from all three of them to take us through some of the quite profound changes to the legal landscape in China that have been taking place in recent years. So I think Professor Liu is going to start us off, and thank you, sir. We'll look forward to what you have to say.
Okay, thanks for the invitation of Professor Matthew. It's my honor to attend this conference with my partner, Dr. Li and Jinghui. We will introduce charity law in China for all of you here today. Now, I'd like to start with the overview of charity law. Of the overview of charity law 2016 in China, and later my partner will focus on charity collection and charity trust in China. Well, since there is no tradition in China to legislation charity law, you may be wondering why. Why China needed it? I think there are two main reasons about it. The first reason, is social need. There have been great development in China about the charity. This graph reflects the amount of charitable donation from 2007 to 2016. The number boosted from about 22 billion in 2007 to 139 billion in 2016. Apparently, it's an incredible growth rate, almost 324.6%, with an average annual growth rate of 22.6%. With the rapid development of charity, many problems also appear in practice. For example, fraud in charity collection, misuse of charity fund, and other illegal activities have been increasing over the last 20 years. Given this, more and more people in China think that China needs to legislate charity law with a view to effectively supervising charitable activities and at the same time promoting the development of charity. This is the first reason. Another reason is about legislation. Notably, charity fraud and misuse have been happening commonly in practice, which indicated the existence of problems inherent in the previous legislation, supervision, and administration of the charity system in China. As shown in this graph, before Charity Law 2060, many laws related to charity have been legislated by the National People's Congress, the State Council, and the Ministry of Civil Affairs in China. And you will find that they all focus on special charitable issues, which means there are still numerous problems that remain unregulated. This is a second reason. In fact, to legislate charity law was proposed as early as 2005 by China's Ministry of Civil Affairs. However, it was until 2008 that the proposal was listed into the 5 years legislative plans of the National People's Congress. But as a result of many problems and difficulties, this proposal was eventually not completed. 5 years later, in 2030, the charity law was again listed into the 5 years legislative plan of the National People's Congress. Until 2016, it was finally voted through on March the 16th and come into force on September the 1st of the same year. Okay, let's look at the common basic content of the charity law, which consists of 12 chapters, 112 articles, which include charitable organization, charitable donations, charitable trust, and so on. It can be said that the charity law regulated all aspects of charity in detail, which is a milestone in the history of China's charity legislation. With nearly 3 years of in practice, several problems can be discerned in the charity law itself, especially in the articles of charitable collection and charitable trust. Now, Dr. Li Dejian and Jing Hui will introduce the following two parts. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, I would like to thank Professor Harding for inviting me to attend this so important conference. Well, today my topic is charitable collections in China. Because time is quite limited, I just introduce some basic legal framework and the current main problems and how to refer the current system. As you can see, that China is a civil law country, so there are many legal definitions and legislators directly. In terms of charitable collections, the definition is that they are activities carried out by charities to collect property on the basis of charitable purpose. Well, by looking at this definition, you may not get a general idea of what is a charitable collection in China. But in practice, you must to understand the several points. The first one is that in China, when we talk about charitable collections, or say charitable fundraisings, only charities, registered charities, have the right to carry out the charitable collections. And the second one is charity law in China only regulate charitable collections, which means that for non-charitable collections, such as benevolent or philanthropic collections in England or in some common law countries, they may be also regulated by church law, but this cannot happen in China. And sometimes in practice, even for Chinese charity regulators, they only use collections system to refer to charitable collections. That means for non-charitable collections, they cannot even use collections in practice. So, but Chinese scholars and some practitioners and even regulators to create a new term to refer to non-charitable collection, what we call it individual self-help, a person asks others, sometimes the general public, to help him or herself, or his or her family members. In terms of charitable collections, China has a special classification, that is charitable public collections and charitable targeted collections. For public collections, there are some examples. For example, I can carry out a charity can carry out collections in public places, such as in school or in supermarket. But for targeted collections, the scope is quite limited. It's only limited to the essentials, the members or directors of a charity. Apart from targeted collections, now the public collections get the most strictest regulation by Chinese regulator. So for charity, all the charity have the right to make charitable collections. But if a charity wants to make public charitable collections, it must first get a public collection certificate, which usually takes 2 years to finish this procedure. And if you want to make a public collections on the internet, you must publish the relevant information on the charitable collection platform, which is approved and appointed by Chinese charity regulator. So sometimes, and actually in practice, the number of those platforms are quite limited, only 20 or 30 in practice. And you also need to satisfy you also need to make collection schemes and to fill it with the charity regulators, and you also need to publish the relevant information to the general public. And for some other stakeholders, for example, if you are a for-profit company, if you are government, you want to make charitable collections, the answer is no. You have to find a suitable charity to cooperate with you to do this job. So in practice, for non-charitable collections, now the main problem is that so far, because charity law does not regulate this area, there are quite a lot of scandals in this area. Because time is quite limited, so I will not introduce it. But in terms of the current charitable collections, especially the charitable public collections, now the current regulation is very strict. As I said, first you must be a charity, then you need to get a public collection certificate, and you need to fill the relevant document to the charity regulator if you want to carry out a charitable project. And now, because China's internet industry is developing very rapidly, but for some charities, although making internet collections can help you to raise quite a lot of money, but the question is, you need to finish 2 procedures one by one, because if you want to carry out internet collections at the same time you want to make the traditional collections, you also to register to fill the relevant documents. You also need to publish the relevant information twice. So the future reform is that we should make the unified collection law to regulate both the charitable collections and the non-charitable collections. And in terms of the charitable collections, the current regulation should be relaxed in quite a lot of ways: procedures, registration, filling, information, disclosure, and so on. And at the same time, because the internet is developing so quick and can really help charities to raise a lot of money. So in the future, maybe the regulation only regulates internet collections should be unified together with the regulation of the traditional collections in public places. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I will talk about the charitable trust in China. In 2000, charitable trust was introduced with the promulgation of the Chinese charity law in 2016. The legislator proposed two objectives for the charitable trust: promoting charitable undertaking and giving effect to the status wishes. The regulator for the supervision of the charitable trust is the Civil Affairs Department. Different from ACNC, the Civil Affairs Department is not independent, but is subject to the high control of the central government. And in today's presentation, I would like to talk about two aspects regarding the operation of the charitable trust in practice. The first one is, what is the relationship of the two objectives? The second one is, what does the regulatory practice of the charitable trust look like? Now let's have a look at the first question. Like I mentioned before, there are two objectives: promoting charitable undertaking and giving effect to the status wishes. What does wishes mean? What is the relationship of the two objectives? The legislation is silent on this issue. In last December, I did some interview with the policymakers, trustees, and trust lawyers. According to the interview data, the current finding is that from the eyes of the practitioners, there is no true conflict between the two objectives. Promoting charitable undertaking is the overarching objective of the charitable trust. Under the overarching objective, the status wishes can be given effect to the largest extent. The finding can be understood in two dimensions. First, the status wishes have nothing to do with the advancement of the status personal interest. Giving effect to the status wishes means that if the status law in practice have wishes to change the management method of the trust properties or the criteria for the selection of the beneficiaries, such kind of wishes can be given effect in practice. But the status law is forbidden to use the charitable trust to advance his or her personal interest. Pursuant to Article 105 of the Chinese charity law, any use of trust properties for non-charitable purpose would give rise to severe administrative penalties. The second aspect is concerned with the practice. I interviewed 9 trustee lawyers and trustees in last December. I asked them 2 questions. The first one is, in the stage where the charitable trust has not been created, it is just the negotiation and communication stage. The trusteeship contract has not been concluded between the status law and the trustee. I call it pre-established stage. In this stage, if the status law communicates the intention that you are the trustee, you need to follow my instruction. You need to take into account my personal interest when managing the trust affairs. I asked the trustee, what would you do in this scenario? The interview data shows that there is an agreement between the 9 trustees. That is, they will say no. They will decline to sign the trusteeship contract. They will decline to accept the trust business. The reason is that from the perspective of the trustees, the charitable trust is not a profitable business. And at the same time, there are lots of risks inherent in the operation of the charitable trust. If the information regarding the misuse of trust properties is disclosed to a general public, the trustee would suffer irrevocable reputational damage. The interviewed trustee told me that they fully understood such kind of risk, and no reasonable trustee would risk his or her reputation by complying with the instruction of a statute law that are clearly prohibited by the law. The second question I ask is, in the stage where the charitable trust has been created, in the day-to-day management of the charitable trust affairs, in this stage, if the statute law turns up and asks the trustee to take into account his personal interest, I asked the trustee, what would you do? 6 of the 9 trustees interviewed told me that the charitable trust contracts they used had already incorporated a long and clear clause articulating the process to be followed in the event of disputes between trusted parties. According to the resolution dispute clause, in this scenario, the trustee will communicate with the statute first, explaining that any consideration of a trusted party's personal interest is not permissible by the law. If a dialogue occurs in practice, it has been agreed in advance that the trustee can submit the dispute to a regulator for review. The other 3 trustees interviewed told me that they had reserved themselves with the power to resign in the trust contract. With the appearance of conflict between the statutor and the trustee is great, and the statutor's intervention demonstrates a high possibility to cause risks of non-compliance. The trustee expects to exercise this kind of contractual power to get rid of such dilemmas. So at present, we can summarize two key findings. First, in the eyes of the practitioners, there is no true conflict between the two institutional objectives for the charitable trust. Second, the trustees fully understand the risks that may arise out of the operation of the charitable trust. The perception of risks by the trustees have a huge impact upon the interaction between the statutor and the trustee in the ongoing operation of the charitable trust. A second topic I would like to talk about today is the regulatory practice of charitable trust. According to Article 45 of the Chinese Charity Law, to create a charitable trust, the trust parties need to submit the documents to the regulator for recording. Recording in law means that the regulator just exercise formal examination rather than substantive examination over the trust documents. In other words, if the documents submitted have already satisfied the requirement specified by the law, the regulators in practice have no discretion to decline the application of recording. That is the meaning of recording in law. But in practice, it is another picture. The majority of the trustees and trust lawyers told me that in practice, the regulators have wishes to exercise substantive examination over the trust documents. They tend to examine the documents very carefully and rigorously and give detailed guides on how to modify the trust provisions. So in practice, it is substantive examination. Why? What is the reason? The interview data shows that the key reason lies in the perception of risks by the regulators. The regulatory officials in the last 10 years has witnessed a lot of scandals surrounding the misuse of charity properties. So they fully understand the risks that may be associated with the operation of the charitable trust. They know that any regulatory failure or regulatory scandal would result in the regulator suffering irrevocable reputation damage. And more importantly, from bureaucratic perspective, the career advancement of the regulatory officials in question will be considered to be jeopardized. Given this understanding, the regulatory officials in practice tend to maintain a high degree of control over the creation and ongoing administration of the charitable trust. So we can say that the perception of risks is one of the key reasons leading to the gap between the law and the practice in terms of regulation of the charitable trust in practice. That is the second topic I talk about. Thank you.